Hello and welcome back to my vlog. Thought we'd have a little fun today. Reading from Grandpa Sims's book, The Old Schoolmaster's Reflections, one about sorghum molasses. And I'm sure it wasn't anything like his sorghum molasses, but I had used some in a dessert I made the other day. It made me think about this. Sorghum molasses was a delicacy of the first order. We had it for every meal. It was like nectar on hot fried mush. It was delicious on big slices of hot homemade bread. Then when we ate it at school that day, it had penetrated all through the bread. We did not use any butter, because then the molasses would all run off the bread. That molasses-soaked bread was food for the gods. And let me tell you about baked beans. First, you soak the beans in soft rainwater from the old cistern under the back porch. You have to make sure there are no dead rats or rabbits in the cistern. Then you strain the water good to get out the bugs and other stuff like that. Next, you boil it good to kill any germs and to take away some of the awful smell, too. At some point along the line, after you put the beans in this soft water, you add a generous portion of sorghum. The concoction that you now have makes your mouth water even before you taste it. Everyone raised a patch of sugar cane when I was a kid. The size of the family determined the size of the cane patch. We did not raise it to sell, although there were some people who lived in town and who did not have any relatives in the country who raised cane who would have been glad to buy it. We usually had the biggest patch in the neighborhood. We had sorghum all year long and shared with our neighbors when they ran out. Between sorghum and black apple butter, we never suffered for lack of a delectable spread for our bread and top dressing for cottage cheese. It is quite a job to bring a patch of cane from the seeds to the syrup on the table. You plant the seeds thick. When the plants are about 6 inches high, you thin it. That was a real job. I never could bear to pull out those nice green plants and throw them away. So someone had to follow me and finish the job. I still feel the same way about any kind of plants that have to be thinned. And I never could understand why the cane had to be hoed. We cultivated it with a plow, but on top of that, we had to hoe it too. Just let a silly old weed show itself, and we swarmed over that patch like an army. That stuff surely had to be pampered. I suppose it did help to make big fat stalks, which were the kind that made the best molasses. The time came when the cane had to be topped and stripped of leaves. It took a man to top the cane because it was too tall for a little kid to reach. Anyone could strip the leaves, though, but it had to be done right. If you left too much of the leaves on the stalks, it made the molasses bitter. Your hands were all cut and bleeding by the time you finished because the leaves were sharp as a razor. The best tops, which were the seeds, were hung in the corn crib for seed the next year. Next, you cut the bare stalks, piled them in small piles, and tied them in bundles. If you got hot and thirsty, you chewed a stalk of cane. Of course, we chewed cane stalks for weeks before it was harvested, and it was not always from our own patch either. It was easy to cut yourself on a cane stalk while you were peeling it because the edges were sharp as a hunting knife. For years, Dan Rauch operated a cane mill for our whole neighborhood. It was located on a little hill, and the juice ran downhill to the pans. The mill was all handmade and looked like something from deepest India or some other place of ancient machinery. It was all tied together with binder twine and baler wire. 2 mules furnished the power, although he did have some oxen who were used at times. They were hitched to the end of a long beam that was geared with wooden gears to the 2 upright rollers that squashed the juice out of the cane stalks. Ahead of this big beam was another one that went around ahead of the mules. Dan tied a line to this one and to the mules, and when they started to walk around in a circle, this line would jerk them and keep them moving. If this did not keep them moving fast enough, Dan would give them a couple wallops on the rump with a big fat piece of cane. Dan usually fed the cane into the rollers. No one else could do it good enough. The juice ran down into a big tub and then drained downhill into the boiling pans. The pans were heated with wood, and it was a man-sized job to keep the fires going. Each pan was a little lower than the one ahead of it, so all you had to do was pull out a stopper when you wanted to send it on its way. During the rush season, Dan ran his mill day and night. You had to make a date to have your cane pressed. If you wanted to be sure you got your own cane back in molasses, you hung around and watched it go through the mill. We always did. We didn't want any bug juice in our molasses from some patch where they were not careful about caring for their cane. Making the molasses was chiefly just hard work. The fun came in the eating. Maple syrup was different. As much fun to make as to eat. And that's Grandpa Sims on Sorghum Molasses. Make it a great day, and bye for now.